The dust of the town tasted like defeat. It coated her tongue, settled in the lines of her worn hands, and clung to the thin, patched clothes of her 2 children. She was a ghost in this place, a spectre of misfortune that the good people of Prosperity Flats pretended not to see. They called her the China Woman, never by her name, My Lin. A name was a courtesy, and she had run out of credit for those long ago. Her husband, Lian, had chased a dream of gold into the unforgiving American soil and found only a grave. He had left her with 2 small mouths to feed, an ocean of loneliness, and a debt to Mr. Abernathy that grew like a cancer. Now, the final bill had come due. Abernathy, a man whose smile never reached his cold, calculating eyes, stood behind the counter of his mercantile, a ledger open before him like a death sentence. Her children, Xiao and An, huddled behind her legs, their small bodies trembling not just from hunger, but from the chilling finality in the air. The pot-bellied stove in the corner radiated a heat that seemed to mock the ice in her soul. "The charity ends today," Abernathy said, his voice slick with false sympathy. "You've had your warnings. The room in the back is needed. The food is for paying customers." He gestured to the door, outside of which a biting wind was already beginning to howl its winter song. She looked at Xiao, his face pale and gaunt, his eyes too large for his head. She looked at An, so small, who had not cried but only watched her with a terrible, silent trust. That trust was a blade in her heart. She had failed them. There was nothing left to sell, nothing left to beg for. There was only herself. My Lin pushed her children gently to one side, stepping forward to the counter. Her movements were stiff, as if her body were already carved from ice. She looked at the heavy iron manacles Abernathy kept for sale, a grim decoration on the wall behind him. "Sir," she began, her voice a dry whisper, a sound she hardly recognized as her own. She cleared her throat and tried again, forcing the words from a place of ultimate desperation. "I will wear these chains for life, if you feed my children tonight." The store went silent. The few customers, a trapper smelling of pine and frost, a rancher's wife with a basket of eggs, all froze. Abernathy's eyebrows shot up, his lips parting in a grotesque parody of surprise that quickly twisted into a cruel, knowing smirk. He saw not a mother's sacrifice, but a new commodity. "Well, now," he purred, leaning forward. "An interesting proposition. But what use have I for a scrawny thing like you? You can't lift barrels. You can't keep books." He was toying with her, enjoying her degradation, performing for his audience. Her shame was a fire on her skin, but she held his gaze. She would not look away. She would burn for her children. It was in that moment of terrible silence that another man moved. He was the trapper from the corner, a man who had been a quiet pillar of shadow until now. He was tall and broad, dressed in buckskins that had seen years of hard travel. His face was weathered, his features a blend of sun-hardened pioneer and the sharp, noble lines of the native tribes who lived in the mountains. The townspeople called him Silas, and they spoke of him in whispers, a man who belonged to the wilderness, not to their civilized world. He stepped forward, his moccasins making no sound on the wooden floor. He did not look at My Lin. His eyes, dark and piercing, were fixed on Abernathy. He unslung a heavy bundle from his back and let it fall onto the counter with a soft, rich thud. He untied the leather cord, and a cascade of perfect pelts spilled out, beaver, silver fox, ermine, each one a king's ransom. Abernathy's greedy eyes widened. He had never seen such a collection, so flawless, so valuable. "What's this, Silas?" he asked, his voice losing its predatory edge and taking on a sycophantic whine. Silas's voice, when it came, was like the sound of rocks shifting deep underground. Low, steady, and final. "Her debt," he said. He nudged the pile of furs. "And supplies. Enough for a winter." For 3-inch Abernathy licked his lips, his mind racing, calculating. This was far more than the woman owed. It was a windfall. "Done," he said instantly, snatching a pristine fox pelt from the pile. He looked at My Lin. "You're a lucky woman. Looks like you've been bought." After all, My Lin flinched. She had traded one cage for another. She looked at the silent mountain man, at his unreadable face. She expected cruelty. She expected a different kind of master, one who lived by the harsh laws of the wild. She pulled her children close, their small hands gripping her dress. Her chains were invisible now, but she felt their weight all the same. She was no longer a ghost. She was property. The man, Silas, did not speak again. He gathered the supplies Abernathy's boy hurriedly packed: flour, salt, cured meat, beans, 2 thick wool blankets. He loaded them onto the back of a patient mule tethered outside, his movements economical and sure. He did not look at her, did not command her, did not acknowledge her beyond a single, sharp nod toward the animal. It was a gesture that said, "Follow." And so she did. She took Xiao's hand in her right and lifted it into her left arm, her body aching with hunger and exhaustion. The people of Prosperity Flats watched them go, their faces a mixture of pity, scorn, and morbid curiosity. They watched the strange, silent mountain man lead the broken China woman and her children out of town and into the teeth of the waiting wilderness. The first few hours were a torment of fear. Mai Lin's mind was a maelstrom of terrible possibilities. Every rustle of the wind in the pine sounded like a threat. Every glance the man cast backward felt like an assessment, a judgment of his purchase. She expected him to walk fast, to push them beyond their limits, to show his irritation at the slow pace of a woman and 2 small children. She expected cruelty. She received only silence. The path grew steep, and Xiao, his little legs unused to such a climb, stumbled and fell. A small cry escaped his lips. Mai Lin's heart seized. She rushed to him, expecting an angry word from Silas, a curse for the delay. But he had already stopped. He stood over them, his shadow falling across their small, pathetic huddle. He did not speak. He did not flinch. He simply bent down, his large, calloused hand surprisingly gentle as he examined the boy's scraped knee. Then, without a word, he lifted Xiao and settled him on his own broad shoulders. Xiao, startled, looked down at his mother with wide eyes. Mai Lin could only stare, her throat tight. The man turned and continued walking, his stride even and unburdened, as if the weight of a 5-year-old child was nothing at all. They walked until the sun began to bleed across the snow-capped peaks. He chose a spot for their camp, a small hollow sheltered by ancient, moss-covered rocks. He slid Xiao from his shoulders and set him down gently by the pack mule. Then he went to work. He built a fire with the quiet efficiency of a man who had done so 1,000 times. He laid out one of the new wool blankets on the driest patch of ground. He took out a pan, some salted pork, and a bag of beans, and began to cook. The smell of frying meat was dizzying. Mai Lin hadn't realized how faint she was with hunger until that moment. Her children watched the pan with a desperate intensity. She expected him to eat first, to take the lion's share, to toss them the scraps like dogs. It was the way of the world she knew. Instead, when the food was cooked, he served it onto 2 tin plates and handed them to her. He gestured toward the children. "Feed them." Only after they had eaten, gulping down the food with a desperate haste that broke their mother's heart, did he serve himself a smaller portion than he had given them. He sat across the fire from them, his back against a rock, eating slowly. He did not watch them. He watched the flames, his face a mask of stoic calm in the flickering light. Later, as the cold deepened, he took the second blanket and draped it over her and the sleeping children. She flinched as he drew near, a reflexive, ingrained response to a man's proximity. He paused, his hand hovering in the air. He did not touch her. He simply adjusted the blanket to ensure it covered them completely, his movements careful and deliberate. He then returned to his side of the fire, stoking it with another log before settling down with only his worn buckskin jacket for warmth. Lying there in the dark, the warmth of the fire on her face and the heavy wool blanket over her, Mai Lin felt a crack appear in the wall of ice around her heart. It was a tiny, hairline fracture, but it was there. She had offered herself in chains. She had been bought. But this man, this silent stranger, had not put chains on her. He had put a blanket over her. He had carried her child. He had fed them first. She did not understand. For the first time in a very long time, she did not know what to expect. And in that not knowing, a strange and terrifying seed of hope began to stir in the frozen ground of her soul. They arrived at his home after 2 more days of travel. It was not a place that could be found by accident. Tucked away in a high valley, shielded by a thick stand of aspen and pine, was a cabin. It was small and simple, built of sturdy, hand-hewn logs, with a stone chimney breathing a steady plume of smoke into the crisp air. It looked like it had grown from the earth itself, a part of the mountain, solid and enduring. There was a sense of peace about the place that was so profound it was almost unnerving. The world of men, of debt and shame and cruel words, could not reach this high. Silas led the mule to a small lean-to, and Mylin stood uncertainly by the cabin door, holding her children's hands. This was it. This was the cage. He opened the door and gestured for them to enter. The inside was sparse but immaculately clean. A stone hearth dominated one wall, a low fire burning within. There was a rough-hewn table with 2 stools, shelves holding neatly stacked tins and jars, and a bed built into the far corner. But he led them past his own bed to a smaller room, little more than an alcove, separated from the main living space by a heavy curtain. Inside was a simple cot, but it was piled with soft furs, and the air smelled of dried lavender and pine. He placed their small bundle of belongings at the foot of the cot. "This is yours," he said. It was one of the longest sentences she had heard him speak. Then he turned and left, pulling the curtain closed behind him, granting them a privacy she had not known since before her husband's death. The days that followed fell into a quiet, unspoken rhythm. Mylin woke each morning to find a stack of firewood and a bucket of fresh water just outside her curtain. Silas would already be gone, disappearing into the forest at dawn and returning at dusk with game or a fresh line of traps to be prepared. He never told her what to do. He never gave her orders. She expected commands, a list of chores, the duties of a servant. She received only space. And so, hesitantly at first, she began to make that space her own. She swept the floor. She tended the fire. She took the food he provided, the flour, the salted meat, the wild vegetables he would sometimes leave on the table, and she cooked. She made stews and baked dense, hearty bread in a cast-iron pot by the hearth. At first, she served him his plate timidly, setting it on the table and retreating to her room to eat with her children. But one evening, he placed a 3rd stool at the table. It was a silent invitation. From then on, they ate together, the 3 of them, in a silence that was slowly transforming from awkwardness into a strange kind of comfort. He spoke to her in actions. One afternoon, she found a pair of small, sturdy moccasins on the table, perfectly sized for Xiao. A few days later, a doll, carved from softwood and with a dress made of scraps of red flannel, appeared for Anne. She watched him sometimes, in the evenings, by the firelight. He would take a piece of wood and a knife, and his large, rough hands would move with a surprising, delicate grace. He wasn't just whittling, he was creating. One night, she woke to a small sound and peeked through the curtain. He was at the table, his back to her, meticulously carving 2 small, interconnected figures. The next morning, sitting beside their plates, were 2 wooden cranes, their necks elegantly entwined. In her culture, the crane was a sacred thing, a symbol of longevity, of good fortune, of a hope that could fly on powerful wings. To see them here, in this wild place, carved by this silent man, was a message more profound than any words. She picked them up, her fingers tracing the smooth lines. She felt the tears before she knew she was crying, hot drops falling onto the polished wood. They were not tears of sorrow or fear. They were tears of release, as if a dam of grief inside her had finally broken. He saw. He was standing by the door, ready to leave for the day, and he saw. He did not look away. He did not move to comfort her. He simply watched her, his gaze steady, and in his eyes, for the first time, she saw not a purchase, not a burden, but a person. He was seeing her. Mylin. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod, and then he was gone, leaving her alone with the 2 wooden birds and the earth-shattering realization that she was not in a cage. She was in a sanctuary. The seasons turned. The deep snows of winter melted, feeding the roaring creeks of spring. The valley bloomed with wildflowers, and the air grew soft and warm. My Lin's children, once pale and thin, grew rosy-cheeked and strong. Their laughter, a sound she thought had been lost forever, now echoed through the small cabin. She had found her voice, too, not just in spoken words, which were still used sparingly but with growing ease between her and Silas, but in her own being. She moved with a confidence she had never possessed. Her hands, once just for survival, now tended a small garden she had carved out of the rich soil behind the cabin. She sang old songs from her homeland to her children, quiet melodies of rivers and mountains a world away. The fear was a distant memory, a ghost story she could hardly believe was her own. It was on a bright summer afternoon that the outside world found them. She was washing clothes in the creek, the children splashing nearby, when she heard the sound of horses, loud and clumsy in the quiet of their valley. Her blood ran cold. 2 men rode into the clearing. One was Mr. Abernathy, his town clothes looking absurd and out of place, his face slick with sweat and smug satisfaction. The other was a brutish man with a tarnished star pinned to his vest, a hired lawman whose authority came from a gun, not a conscience. Silas was somewhere in the high meadows, checking his traps. She was alone. "There you are," Abernathy called out, his voice a violation of the valley's peace. "Took us long enough to find this little hideaway. Enjoying your vacation?" He dismounted, his boots trampling the wildflowers. "The vacation is over. You're coming back. You're my property." You ran away. The old words, the old shame, washed over her. Her first instinct was to grab her children, to run, to hide behind the cabin door. She could feel the familiar ice creeping back into her veins. The lawman smirked, resting a hand on the butt of his pistol. "The man's got a legal claim. Bill of sale, clear as day." The debt was transferred, not erased, but then she heard another sound. The soft, near-silent tread of moccasins on pine needles. Silas had emerged from the tree line. He held no weapon, only a small rabbit in his hand. He moved to stand between her and the intruders, a silent, unmovable wall of a man. He didn't look at the men. He looked at her. And in that look, she saw everything. Trust. Respect. He was not going to fight for her. He was going to stand with her. It was a choice he was giving her. The choice to remain a victim or to claim the strength she had found in this valley. Abernathy scoffed at the sight of him. "Step aside, half-breed. This is business between civilized folk." He took a step forward, his hand reaching for her arm. And my Lin found her fire. It rose from the soles of her feet, a heat that burned away the last vestiges of her fear. She stepped out from behind Silas, placing herself in front of him, shielding him as he had so often shielded her. Her voice did not tremble. It was as clear and cold as the mountain water. "I am not your property," she said, her eyes locked on Abernathy's. "You were paid. I saw the pelts. Your claim is with your own greed, not with me." Abernathy was shocked into silence. He had expected a cowering, broken creature. He was facing a queen in her own court. "My home is here," she continued, her voice gaining strength. She gestured to the valley, to the cabin, to her children who were watching with wide, unafraid eyes. "My life is here. You have no power here." The hired lawman shifted uncomfortably. This was not the simple retrieval he had been paid for. There was a dignity here that his tarnished star could not overcome. It was Silas who spoke the final word. He still had not raised his voice. He did not need to. The quiet authority in his tone was more absolute than any shout. "You heard the lady," he said, his eyes finally moving to fix on the 2 men. Leave. There was no threat of violence in the word, but there was a promise. A promise that this land, this home, this woman, were all protected by a force they could not hope to defeat. Abernathy sputtered, his face turning a blotchy red, but he saw the truth in Silas's eyes. He saw his own world of paper debts and cheap power crumble against the stone reality of this man and this woman. Wordlessly, he turned, climbed back on his horse, and rode away, the lawman following close behind, leaving only the scent of their failure hanging in the pure mountain air. My Lin stood watching them go, the afternoon sun warm on her face. She had not been rescued. She had stood. And she had won. In the wake of the confrontation, a new kind of peace settled over the valley, deeper and more resilient than before. It was the peace that comes not from the absence of threats, but from the knowledge that you have the strength to face them. The bond between My Lin and Silas, forged in silence and action, was now sealed in shared victory. They spoke more, their conversation still lean, but filled with an easy intimacy. They would sit by the fire in the evenings, and she would tell him stories of her childhood by the Yangtze River, and he would tell her the names of the stars in the vast, dark sky. His love was not a thing of flowery words or grand pronouncements. It was in the way he watched her, his eyes full of a quiet reverence. It was in the solid presence of his hand on her back as they looked out over their valley. He did not love a broken thing he had fixed. He loved the fierce, brilliant woman she had revealed herself to be. One autumn evening, as the first snows began to dust the highest peaks, they saw a flicker of a fire far down the trail, a sign of lost travelers. The next morning, a man, a woman, and their young daughter stumbled into the clearing, their faces etched with hunger and fear. They had been run out of a mining camp, their luck gone, their resources exhausted. My Lin looked at the woman's eyes and saw her own past staring back at her, the desperation, the shame, the terror of a mother unable to provide. Without a moment's hesitation, she went to them. She did not see a burden. She saw people in need. She led them to her cabin, sat them by her fire, and ladled hot, fragrant stew into their bowls. She wrapped the child in a warm blanket and spoke to the mother in a voice that was calm and reassuring. Silas stood at the doorway, watching. As My Lin gently brushed the hair from the frightened child's face, a slow, genuine smile spread across his lips. It transformed his weathered face, revealing a deep and profound joy. He was not watching the woman he had saved from a cruel merchant. He was watching the woman she had always been, a woman of immense strength, compassion, and grace. He had not rescued her from her past, he had simply given her a place where she could finally outgrow it. He loved her not in spite of the scars she carried, but because of the incredible strength it took to bear them. The world had tried to define her by her sorrow, to label her a burden, to put her in chains. But here, in this sanctuary of towering peaks and quiet love, she had reclaimed her own name. She was My Lin. She was not a possession. She was a provider. She was not a victim. She was a source of strength. She was home. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more true-hearted stories on True North Tales. If you had seen her there in that dusty store, would you have stepped in too? Tell us in the comments.